Soren signed the banishment order at first light, and Kaya felt the ink dry on her skin like a brand. She was standing in the center of the Ironvale Pack's judgment circle when she felt it. Not heard it, not saw it, but felt it in the soft tissue beneath her sternum, the place where the mate bond lived like a second heartbeat. It stuttered, then it went cold. The paper was still in Elder Marin's hand, still trembling from the transfer, but the damage had already moved through Kaya's body faster than sound. She pressed her bare feet harder into the frost-stiffened grass and willed herself not to fold. 83 wolves stood in a ring around her. She had counted them the moment they assembled, the way she always counted in moments of crisis. Doors, exits, faces, numbers. 83, and not one of them looked away from the verdict. They watched her with the careful blankness of people who had already made their peace with what was about to happen. Soren stood at the far edge of the circle, behind Elder Marin, behind the 2 senior wardens. He was in human form, dressed in the plain gray shirt he always wore to judgment proceedings, the one that meant he was acting as alpha, not as himself. He had not looked at her since he entered the circle. She understood, finally, what that meant. The elder's voice carried, "Kaya Ven, half-blooded daughter of the Ven line, you are found to have concealed the nature of your gift from this pack for a period of 9 years. The Alpha's decree is final. You will leave Ironvale land by the time the first light fully clears the ridge. You will take no pack property, no stored provisions, no escort. The outer boundary will be sealed behind you." Kaya waited for Soren to look at her. The cold climbed from her feet to her knees. He never did. She walked out of the circle herself before any of them could touch her. 9 years earlier, Kaya had not known what silence felt like inside a pack until she arrived in Ironvale for the first time. She had grown up at the edge of the Scareth Hollows, which was less a pack territory and more a loose collection of half-bloods who had drifted too far from their origin lines to be claimed by anyone. Her mother was full-blooded Ven, a bloodline so old it had no living allies and no surviving territory. Her father was something else entirely, something her mother refused to name, something that had left a mark on Kaya's gift that she spent years learning to keep hidden. She was 17 when her mother died of fever, 20 when she finally ran out of reasons to stay in the Hollows, and 22 when the Ironvale border wolves found her moving through their northern territory and brought her in. They had not been unkind. She needed to remember that. They had given her food, a bed in the outer residences, 3 days to explain herself before the Alpha reviewed her case. She had expected a man like the ones she knew from the Hollows, loud with borrowed authority, quick to remind you of your debt. She had prepared for that. She had not prepared for Soren. He had come to her quarters on the second evening, unannounced, which apparently was a thing Alphas of Ironvale did when they wanted to form their own opinion rather than rely on their warden's reports. He knocked. She noted that. He had knocked and waited. She had opened the door expecting ceremony and found a man in work clothes with grass still on his boots who looked at her the way a person looks at something they have been trying to solve for a long time without realizing they were looking for it. "You're the half-blood from Scareth," he said. "You're the Alpha who hasn't decided whether to keep me or send me back," she said. Something moved across his face. Not amusement exactly, more like the recognition of a game he hadn't expected to be playing. "Walk with me," he said. "I want to see how you move through the territory." It was an old test, how a wolf moved through unfamiliar land, told an experienced Alpha everything about training, instinct, origin. She knew he was reading her. She let him. They walked for 2 hours through the eastern reach of Ironvale land, through the hemlock stands and the low creek beds, and the place where the territorial markers shifted from wood to stone, and in all that time she said very little, and he said less, and by the time they came back to the outer residences, the sky had turned the specific shade of violet that precedes full dark. He stopped at the path that divided toward the main residence and said, "You're afraid of something?" She had been waiting for this. Everyone who comes to a new pack is afraid. "Not like that," he said. "You're afraid of something inside yourself." She had looked at him for 4 full seconds and made the decision she would spend 9 years unpicking. "No," she said, "I'm just tired." He had accepted it. Or he had appeared to accept it. He offered her a place in Ironvale 2 days later, as a non-bonded provisional member, which meant she had pack protection without pack vote rights, and she had taken it because the Hollows were gone and she was out of time. She did not understand what he was to her until the first full moon after she arrived. She had known, theoretically, about mate bonds. The Hollows had them occasionally. She'd seen the way bonded pairs moved around each other like planets, the pull too fundamental to be called choice. She had assumed she would feel it the way everyone described, sudden, obvious, a pull in the chest that announced itself. What she felt, standing at the eastern hemlock tree with Soren 30 feet away in the middle of a pack run, was subtler and more total than anything she'd been warned about. It was not a pull, it was a recognition, the same sensation she'd had as a child when she learned the name for a color she had always seen and never been able to describe. The bond had always been there, naming it only made it visible. She did not tell him. She was provisional. She had a secret she couldn't name. She told herself she was protecting them both. He found out a different way. The way mated wolves always eventually discovered what their bodies already knew. He had been standing close to her during a border assessment, close enough that she could smell wood smoke and cold iron off him, and he had gone very still and looked at her with an expression that stripped away the alpha entirely and left something younger and much less certain. "How long?" he'd said, very quietly. "Since the first full moon," she said. He had not moved for a long moment. Then he had said, "I thought I was imagining it," and there was something in his voice that she would carry for 9 years, like a stone in her chest. Pure, unguarded relief, as if he had been holding his breath since that first walk through the hemlock stands and had only now been allowed to stop. They had not rushed it. That was one of the things she would later be grateful for, and later blame herself for. They had taken their time, spent weeks learning each other in the quiet spaces between pack duties, his hand on the small of her back when they stood together reviewing territory maps, her shoulder against his at pack meals, the long evenings on the stone steps of the main residence, where he talked about what Ironvale had been before his father's time, and she listened with the particular attention she gave to things she did not want to forget. She had been so careful. She had told him almost everything. She told him about her mother. She told him about the Hollows. She told him about the Venn bloodline and what it meant to carry it alone. She did not tell him about her father. She did not tell him about the gift. She told herself it was because she didn't have words for it yet. She told herself she was still learning what it was. Both of those things were true, and neither of them was the real reason. The real reason was simpler and harder to admit. She was afraid that if he knew what she carried, he would look at her the way the Hollows had looked at her mother in the last years of her life, with a wariness that never entirely resolved into trust, no matter how many times trust was earned. She had watched that erode her mother. She did not want to be eroded. Not by him. Not when being with him was the first time she had felt fully solid in her own skin since she was a child. So she kept it. And it grew, the way kept things always grow, not neatly, not manageable, but outward and sideways into every space she hadn't planned for it. By the time of the banishment, she had been fully bonded to Soren for 7 years, held a mid-tier pack role managing the Iron Vale northeastern boundary assessments, and had kept her secret for 9. The thing that broke it open was not carelessness, it was Maren. Elder Maren had been suspicious of Kaya since the 2nd year. Kaya knew this. She had always known it. Maren was old enough to recognize old bloodlines on sight, and she had looked at Kaya across enough pack gatherings to have done her arithmetic. What Maren hadn't known until the incident at the solstice boundary marking was what exactly Kaya's father's line contributed. What Kaya could do, what she had always been able to do, what had kept her alive in the hollows through 2 harsh winters and 1 territorial incursion that should have killed 4 of their number, was see the boundary of things. Not physically. Not in the way a scout sees terrain. She could place her hand on the earth at a territorial line and sense the exact nature of what held it. Old pack agreements, spilled blood from past conflicts, the residue of rituals performed by people who had been dead for a century. She could feel the weak points. She could, if she chose to, reach into that structure and either reinforce it or dismantle it in a way that would be completely invisible to any standard wolf sense. She had never used it to harm Iron Vale. She had used it quietly and consistently to shore up the northeastern boundary for 7 years, which was partly why her assessments were so accurate and her sector had seen no incursions. At the solstice boundary marking, Maren had been watching. She had been watching closely enough to see Kaya's hands press flat to the ground for 6 seconds longer than any physical assessment required. She had felt the resonance. Old as she was, she had enough sensitivity to feel it even if she couldn't identify the source. She had gone to the council with her suspicion, not to Soren first. That was the detail Kaya would keep returning to afterward. Not to Soren first. The council had convened without Kaya's knowledge. The investigation had taken 3 weeks. And somewhere in those 3 weeks, Soren had been presented with the evidence, had been given the council's recommended response, and had signed his name to the banishment order. Without asking her, without one conversation, 9 years, and he had not given her a single word before he signed. Kaya had not cried in the judgment circle. She cried once, alone, on the 3rd hour of walking north, through territory that had already stopped recognizing her. The bond in her chest pulled and ached like a dislocated joint, still present, still insisting on connection, and she walked into it until the walking was all she could feel. The Iron Vale northern boundary ended at a place called the Ashrun, a mile-wide corridor of ancient forest land that no pack claimed because the packs that had tried to hold it in the past had not thrived. The official story was bad hunting and difficult terrain. The actual reason, which Kaya knew from 9 years of boundary work, was the Vethrin. The Vethrin were not wolves. They were not precisely human. They were the oldest territorial presence in the region, predating every pack on record, a clan of shifters whose base form was something older and less defined than any single animal, and they had held the Ashrun since before the Iron Vale line was established. Every pack on their border treated the Ashrun as a dead zone, a buffer they agreed never to enter because the Vethrin had, at several points in recorded pack history, made very clear what happened to wolves who pushed into their space. Kaya walked into the Ashrun at midday because she had nowhere else to go, and also because she had spent 9 years reading the boundary between Iron Vale and the Ashrun, and she understood something about the Vethrin that no Iron Vale elder had ever bothered to learn. They were not hostile to all wolves. They were hostile to pack wolves. To wolves who carried the specific resonance of pack territorial claim, which was a different thing entirely from a wolf who was simply present. A wolf who had been stripped of pack standing, who had had her bond to Ironvale severed by decree, would register to the Vethran's perception as something else. Something unaffiliated, something that might, if she was very careful and very honest, be worth speaking to rather than driving out. She was 3 hours into the Ashrun when she first felt the presence. It did not announce itself. It was simply there, suddenly and completely, the way the Vethran always moved, not approaching, simply arriving, the space around her occupied before she had sensed the transition. She stopped walking and kept her hands loose at her sides and did not look for the source of the presence, because looking was aggression, and she was not here to aggress. "You smell like Ironvale," said a voice to her left. It was low and even, gender indeterminate, and it was not asking a question. "I did," Kaya said. "I was banished this morning." "Why?" "They found out what I could do." A pause. The presence moved around her, not close enough to touch, a slow and deliberate circuit that she felt against her skin like a change in barometric pressure. "Show us," the voice said. She knelt in the dry leaves and pressed both palms to the earth. She showed them everything. She opened the full extent of her perception and let them feel the shape of it, the reach of it, the precision, the 9 years of careful work she had done on a boundary she would never be permitted to stand on again. She held nothing back, because the Vethran would know if she did, and because she was done with the cost of concealment. When she lifted her hands, the forest was different. Not visibly, but the presence around her had become presences, plural, 8 or 9 of them in a ring, and they were not threatening, they were considering. "You reinforced our border from the inside," said the first voice. "For 7 years," she said. "Your southern reach was fracturing in 3 places. I stabilized it. I wasn't paid to. I did it because bad boundaries make everyone less safe." A longer silence. Then, "Come." She followed. The Vethran held territory in the deep center of the Ashrun, in a place where the trees grew so old and close that the canopy replaced the sky entirely. They gave her shelter and food, and asked her nothing for 3 days, which she understood as assessment, the same way Soren had given her 2 days before her first review. She had learned to read assessment. She sat with it and let them read her. On the 4th day, the eldest Vethran, a woman who might have been 60 or 140, whose eyes held the flat, particular intelligence of something that had been watching for a very long time, sat down across from Kaya and said, "What do you want?" "I want to understand what I am," Kaya said. It was the first honest answer she had given to that question in 9 years. "My father's line, no one ever named it. I need someone who knows the old bloodlines to tell me." The eldest looked at her for a long time. "Your father was Vethran." The word landed in Kaya's chest like a key turning a lock that had been rusted shut for 30 years. She said nothing. She breathed. "It is rare," the eldest continued. "A Vethran male and a packline female. The child carries both, but the Vethran gift dominates. You are a boundary reader, a territorial mediator. In the old structure, you would have been trained from birth as a line holder. In the pack structure, you were simply a secret." "In the pack structure, I was simply a liability," Kaya said. The eldest's expression did not soften. Exactly. But something in it acknowledged the precision of the correction. "Stay," she said. "Learn what you are. Learn the full extent of the gift. We do not have a boundary reader in this generation. We need one." Kaya stayed. The weeks in the Ashrun were nothing like the Hollows, and nothing like Ironvale. The Vethran had no hierarchy of dominance in the pack sense. No alpha, no public submission, no judgment circles. They organized around function. Who could do what? Who knew what? Who held what piece of the territorial memory that kept the Ashrun stable? Kaya's gift, which had been a shameful concealment for 9 years, was here a professional credential. They gave her work immediately. Real work, taking her to every boundary point in the Ashrun, letting her place her hands on each, asking her to describe what she felt. They listened. They compared her readings to their oldest records. When she found anomalies they had missed, they noted them without territorial defensiveness. When her readings confirmed their own, they said so plainly. She learned things in the Ashrun she had never had the vocabulary for. She learned that what she could do was not merely sensing. She could reinforce, yes, but she could also communicate through territorial lines, transmit information across pack boundaries in a way that bypassed physical contact entirely. She learned that the gift had a range, and that the range expanded with practice. She learned that the fractures she had been quietly patching in Ironvale's northeastern boundary for 7 years were, in the Vethrin framework, an act of extraordinary sustained skill, the equivalent of performing surgery with improvised tools in bad light, alone, every season, without acknowledgement. She also learned that the Ironvale Pack's northeastern boundary was now deteriorating. Without her quarterly maintenance, 3 of the fault lines she had been managing were reopening. She felt them from inside the Ashrun, felt the specific resonance of their unraveling, the way you might feel a familiar voice going hoarse. She did not act on this. She let it unravel. In the 5th week, she felt Soren, not in person. Through the bond, which had not dissolved with the banishment, bonds did not dissolve by decree, which was something the Ironvale Council apparently had not fully understood when they recommended her exile. The bond was thinner than it had been, stretched by distance and the cold absence of daily contact, but it was present, and in the 5th week it flared with the specific quality of distress. He had found out what was happening to the northeastern boundary. She could feel his alarm through the bond like a hand pressed flat to a wall, not directed at her, not seeking her, but present and near enough to read. He was trying to understand what had changed. He was reviewing her old assessment reports. He was, she suspected, beginning to do the arithmetic she had never done for him. She felt something else, too, mixed into the distress like a second note in a chord. The quality of searching. The bond was reaching. She did not reach back. She let it ache and kept working. By the end of the 2nd month, Kaya had stabilized the Ashrun's entire southern reach, identified 2 previously unmapped fault lines in the western corridor, and been accepted by the Vethrin not as a guest but as a working member of their territorial council. The eldest called her a natural mediator in the old sense of the word, which among the Vethrin meant not a compromiser, but a person whose function was to hold the space between opposing forces without being consumed by either. Kaya understood that she had always been this. She had tried to be only Ironvale's, and the effort of that compression had cost her the ability to see herself clearly. Here, in the Ashrun, she was no longer compressed. She was whatever she actually was, finally, without the framework of pack rank telling her which parts of herself were acceptable and which needed to be kept below the surface. She had moments, particularly at night, when she felt the mate bond pull with a sharpness that took her off her feet. She had moments when she missed the weight of Soren's hand on the back of her neck with a specificity that was almost unbearable. She did not try to extinguish these. She let them move through her, the way the Vethrin had taught her to receive territorial readings. Present, clear, neither suppressed nor obeyed. She thought about what she had been to him, what he had been to her. She thought about 9 years of careful mornings and quiet evenings and the way he looked at territory maps with the same focused gravity he brought to everything, as if the land itself required his full respect. She thought about what he had done with one signature, and she thought about it without the mercy she had extended to him in the first weeks when grief made charity easier. He had signed. He had not asked her to explain herself. He had been given a report by a council that had never trusted her, and he had accepted the report over the bond they shared. That was the thing she could not work past, not the banishment itself. She had survived harder, the act of not asking. 7 years bonded, and he had not believed that she deserved to speak before he condemned her. She did not know what she would do when the boundary situation forced the confrontation that was clearly coming. She only knew that when it came, she would arrive on her own schedule and her own terms, and that she would not be the one who came back asking for forgiveness. The bond pulled. She set her hands in the earth and worked. In the 9th week, the Iron Veil northeastern boundary failed entirely. Kaya felt it in the middle of the night like a snapped wire, a sudden release of tension followed by the specific silence of something that was no longer being held. She sat up in the dark and put her hands flat on the floor of the Vethrin dwelling and felt the full extent of the collapse. The fault lines she had managed for 7 years had opened simultaneously. The boundary wasn't weak, it was gone. More than that, the collapse had a secondary effect. The ritual markers that defined the border between Iron Veil and the Ashrun, the old stone and bone markers that dated back to the first Vethrin Iron Veil agreement, nearly 2 centuries prior, were now destabilized by the sympathetic collapse of the land adjacent to them. The Ashrun's southern border was in danger. She was on her feet and dressed before she had consciously decided to move. The eldest found her at the southern border by dawn. "I know," the old woman said. "I have to go in," Kaya said. "I know that too." The eldest studied her with those long, focused eyes. "Can you stabilize both from Iron Veil's side?" "If I can get to the northeastern fault lines, yes, all of them, and seal the collapse properly this time. Not just maintain it, actually seal it. It will take most of a day. And then it's their problem again." Kaya looked at the Iron Veil tree line, gray and close in the early morning light. "I'm not staying." "No," the eldest agreed, "but you will need to pass through them to reach the fault lines. You will encounter the pack." "Yes," Kaya said, "and the Alpha." The bond answered before she did, a long, slow ache in her sternum that moved upward into her throat. "Yes," she said again. She crossed the boundary at full morning, when the light was direct enough that anyone on the tree line could see her coming clearly. She did not approach like a supplicant or a thief. She walked as herself, at her own pace, with the Vethrin's territorial mark visible on her left wrist where the eldest had placed it 2 weeks ago, not as a claim, but as a credential, proof of what she had become in the weeks Iron Veil had spent not looking. She felt Soren before she saw him. The bond, stretched thin by distance and silence, reacted to his proximity the way a dry root reacts to water, not dramatically, not with any visible convulsion, but deeply, in the oldest part of itself, a reopening toward something it had been growing toward since before either of them had names for it. She felt his presence like the specific quality of warmth that precedes a fire you cannot yet see. Her hands steadied, her breath slowed. She walked. He was standing at the edge of the northeastern hemlock stand with 2 wardens flanking him, and when he saw her, everything else stopped. He had lost weight in the weeks since the banishment. She noted this without permission, the way the bond noted everything about him without asking her consent, the sharpness of his jaw, the way he was holding himself with a careful stillness that she recognized as controlled cost, as a person who had been spending something continuously and was nearly out. He was in plain gray again. "Kaya," he said. "Alpha," she said. Something moved in his face at the title, a flinch that he controlled before it completed. Good. She needed him to feel that. Your northeastern boundary has collapsed, she said. All 3 fault lines failed overnight. I'm here to seal them, not to ask permission. I am the only person within 3 territories who can do this, and I will do it because the Ashrun border is connected to your northeastern reach, and its destabilization affects Vethran territory. I am here on behalf of the Vethran Council. She met his eyes directly. You may observe, you may not interfere. One of the wardens shifted. Soren stopped him with a hand. How long will it take? Soren asked. A full day. Maybe into the evening. He nodded once. His jaw was tight. The bond pulled between them like a tide neither of them had asked for. I need to speak with you, he said. After. We'll see, she said, and walked past him toward the fault lines. She worked through the morning and into the afternoon, moving from point to point in the northeastern boundary, kneeling at each fault line and pressing her hands into the cold ground and doing the full work she had never been permitted to do openly. The wardens kept their distance. Soren did not keep his distance. He stayed within 20 feet of her for the entire day, not interfering, not speaking, just present in the way that she had always registered as one of his most characteristic qualities, his willingness to witness, to stay in proximity to difficult things without flinching away from them. She hated that she still found it beautiful. She let herself hate it and kept working. By the 3rd fault line, she could feel the boundary beginning to cohere. By the 5th, she could feel it knitting. Not patchwork, not the careful provisional maintenance she had been doing for years, but a true seal, the kind that came from using the full extent of her gift without apology. The land received it. She could feel the Ironvale territory accepting the work the way it had never quite accepted her maintenance before, as if it had always been waiting for her to stop holding back. Soren crouched beside her at the 5th fault line, not touching, just close. You've been doing this for 7 years, he said, not accusing, just understanding it, finally, aloud. She did not answer. The reports, he said. Your assessments. Every season, I thought you were just thorough. I was, she said. You were keeping our land safe. She lifted her hands from the ground and sat back on her heels and looked at him. The afternoon light came through the hemlocks at a low angle and caught the side of his face, and the mate bond surged with the specific quality of longing she had not let herself acknowledge in 9 weeks, a longing so precise it had a shape. The shape of his shoulder, the shape of the space beside him she had occupied for 7 years. Yes, she said, and you signed a piece of paper without asking me a single question. He held her gaze. He did not try to minimize it. I know, he said. You were given a report by a council that has distrusted me since year 2. And you signed it. Her voice was even. She had not planned this speech, and she did not perform it. It was simply what was true. 7 years bonded. You didn't say, let me speak with her first. You didn't say, I know her. You just signed. Yes, he said. The word cost him something. She could see that. I need you to understand that whatever you say to me after this boundary is sealed, the answer is not going to be the one you're hoping for, she said. I am not here to come back. I am here to do work that needs doing. And when it's done, I will return to the Ashrun and the Vethran Council, where I have a role and a standing that was never conditional on my being convenient. He was quiet for a moment. The wind moved through the hemlocks above them. I know, he said again. I don't deserve what I'm about to ask. She turned back to the fault line. Then don't ask it yet. She felt him remain beside her as she returned her hands to the earth, and the contact of his nearness against the mate bond was almost physical. Not his hands on her, but the bond's insistence, the biological fact of him 6 inches to her left. the pull that had been present since that first walk through this exact stand of trees 9 years ago when neither of them had names for what was happening. She sealed the 5th fault line and moved to the 6th, and he followed. They did not speak again until the last fault line was closed and the light had gone amber and low. Kaya stood from the ground, and her knees ached, and her hands were cold, and the boundary was whole and sealed in a way it had never been in all the years she had worked it from the shadows. She turned to find Soren, standing 3 feet away, closer than he had been all day, and his expression had changed. The Alpha was gone. What was left was the man who had stood at her door and knocked and waited, the one who had felt relief rather than complication when the bond announced itself, the one who had talked to her on the stone steps about what Ironvale had been before his father's time and what he wanted it to become. "I spent 3 days reviewing your assessments after you left," he said. "Before I understood the boundary situation, before any of that, I spent 3 days reading everything you had written over 7 years, trying to find the evidence for what Marin claimed. And there is no evidence that you ever used your gift against Ironvale. There is overwhelming evidence that you used it to protect us." His voice was not steady, but he did not try to steady it. "I know that does not undo what I did. I signed the order. I should have spoken with you first. I should have trusted what I knew about you over what I was told." Kaya looked at him. The bond did what it had been doing since the moment she crossed the boundary, pulling her toward him with the patient insistence of something geological. She felt it clearly and let it be present without obeying it. "You don't get to come back from that with 3 days of file review," she said. "I know. I have a life now, in the Ashrun. I have work that is mine and a role that doesn't depend on being convenient. I know what I am, finally. I know my father's bloodline. I know what the gift is. I learned all of that because you signed the order, and I walked into the only territory that would teach me." She let that sit between them. "I am not grateful for what you did, but I am no longer what I was before you did it, and I will not give that up." "I'm not asking you to give it up," he said. He took 1 step closer. The bond responded with an ache so sharp she felt it in her back teeth. "I'm not asking you to come back to what was. I'm asking if there is any version of what could be that has us both in it. Whatever that looks like, whatever terms." She held his gaze. She was aware of his breath, the warmth of him in the cooling air, the way the hemlocks smelled like all 9 years at once. "Your terms?" she said. "Whatever you need them to be." She did not move toward him, but she did not step back. "I will maintain the Vethrin Council role. That is not negotiable. I am not a pack wolf in the way Ironvale defines it. I am a boundary reader. I am Vethrin lineaged, and I hold a formal position with the oldest territorial council in this region. Any arrangement between us begins from that position. Not from mine as a pack member, not from mine as a provisional anything." "Yes," he said. "I will not answer to the Ironvale Elder Council for my gift. It is not theirs to sanction. If Marin has standing objections, she can take them to the Vethrin Council, and they will tell her what they told me. What I carry is not a threat, it is a function, and it has been protecting this territory for 7 years. I'll make that clear," he said. "And you will not sign anything that concerns me," she said, "without speaking with me first. That is not a preference, that is a condition." Something broke in his face. Broke clean, the way things break when they have been held in tension long enough. He crossed the 3 feet between them and stopped just close enough that she could feel the heat of his chest without contact, and he said, "Kaya," in the voice that was not Alpha, the voice that was only him, low and unguarded and carrying 9 weeks of silence in it. She placed her hand on his chest. Flat, deliberate. She felt his heartbeat, the mate bond alive between her palm and his ribs, the pull completing itself through simple contact after 9 weeks of enforced distance. "Say it clearly," she said. "I am sorry," he said, "for the order, for not asking. For every week you spent in the Ashrun, becoming something extraordinary because I failed to protect you in the place where you should have been safe." He put his hand over hers, not gripping, just covering. "I will spend however long you give me, making this a territory worthy of what you are." She looked at him for a long moment in the amber light, her hand on his chest, his hand on hers, the boundary whole and sealed behind them. "That's a start," she said. Kaya returned to the Ashrun that night and sat with the eldest for a long time in the firelit quiet of the Vethrin dwelling. "Well," said the eldest. "He said the right things," Kaya said. And I believe he means them." She looked at the fire. "That's not the same as trusting him yet." "No," the eldest agreed. "Trust is a boundary. You, of all people, understand that boundaries require maintenance." Kaya looked at the Vethrin mark on her left wrist. She thought about the northeastern fault lines, sealed and whole for the first time in the land's memory. She thought about what it had felt like to use the full extent of her gift without apology, to press her hands into the earth and give it everything, the land receiving her work without condition. She thought about the weight of Soren's hand over hers, the heartbeat under her palm. She did not go back to Ironvale that night, or the next. She finished her work with the Vethrin Council. She sealed the western fault lines. She completed the boundary survey she had promised the eldest and wrote her findings in the Vethrin territorial record in her own hand. When she finally crossed the Ironvale boundary for the second time, it was not because she had been forgiven, and it was not because she was seeking forgiveness. She crossed because she had done the harder thing first. She had become, completely and without apology, what she actually was. She had learned her name, the real one, not Kaya Ven the provisional member, not the Alpha's mate who kept quiet, but Kaya of the Vethrin line, boundary reader, territorial mediator, the woman who had sealed the land beneath their feet and been exiled for it and come back knowing exactly what she was worth. She crossed on a clear morning when the light came through the hemlocks level and clean. Soren was waiting at the boundary, not with wardens, not with ceremony, just himself, in plain gray, grass on his boots, the same man who had knocked on her door 9 years ago and waited. The mate bond moved between them like tide, like old water running under stone, like something that had been there long before either of them and would be there long after, patient and indifferent to policy and grief and exile. She stopped 3 feet from him. She looked at him. She let the bond be what it was. "Are you ready?" he said. "For what?" she said. "For however long this takes," he said, "to build something worth building." She considered this. She thought about 9 years of kept secrets and what the keeping had cost them both. She thought about the moment she had walked into the Ashrun with nothing left to lose and had learned, for the first time, what she actually held. "I'm not easy," she said. "I know. I'm not going to be quiet about what I am." "Good," he said, and the word carried something she hadn't heard from him before. Pride. Clean and uncomplicated, for exactly who she was. She crossed the last 3 feet. She did not go back to what they had been before, because what they had been before was built on a foundation of her compression. What she walked toward was something else, something built on sealed earth, on gift acknowledged, on the quiet revolutionary fact of a woman who had been exiled for what she was and returned as the authority on it. Soren stood beside her, not in front of her, not behind, Beside, the land received them, the boundary held. The hemlocks were still and enormous in the morning light, and the territory that had tried to exile her stretched in every direction, solid and familiar, and it was hers in the way it had always been hers, not by decree, but by the work of her hands in the ground, by the years of quiet care she had given to the earth without being asked, by the simple, undeniable fact that she had kept this place safe since before it knew her name. She reached for his hand. He gave it without hesitation. And the morning came down through the trees, clean and cold, and full of what came next.